good afternoon, or good morning, whatever it is where you're at. My name is Andrew Manna from Church, Hiddle, and Antrim. I help in Indiana with our Indiana Council of School Attorneys Special Education Committee, and as well on the national level with the Council of School Attorneys through National School Board Association with our IDA committee.
Hi, I'm Lisa Paddock. I'm the Assistant Director at InSource, and InSource is Indiana's Resource Center for Families with Special Needs, and I'm also the InSource Parent Liaison to the Department of Education, and we assist families understanding the special education process and working together with families and schools for great outcomes for kids.
Thanks, friends. And hi, I'm Angie Bosley. I am the president of the Indiana Council for Administrators of Special Education. I am also a special education director in an interlocal special education cooperative just south of Indianapolis, and we serve 6 school districts. Wanted to situate ourselves as Hoosiers, and you can see if maybe you're not from the Midwest, you might kind of wonder which of the states we are. So you can see we're just south of the Great Lakes here, and this is a picture of our beautiful Circle Center in downtown Indianapolis. So some of the objectives that we're going to talk about today is how we came together to support families. We're going to describe how we worked together and we utilized technology. We're going to talk about some positive changes in practice that resulted from the pandemic. And when you're done, you can kind of compare your own state's collaborative responses to those that we had in Indiana. And we're also going to talk about proactive ways that we can do things to prevent disputes and figure things out together. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick review of some dispute resolution data from Indiana in the year 2021. You can see you've got comparison years here. These are state complaints that are filed. And so in fiscal year 21, you can see that there were 121 state complaints filed, which is relatively normal for Indiana. And you can see trends by month, and you have our slides. So if you want to go back and analyze any of this data, you can do so at a later time. So some of the complaint issues, you can see that we have a lot of issues that are filed, and then the violations are quite a bit less. The biggest one is about IEP implementation. And then the second biggest issues found are regarding procedural violations regarding case conference participants or around initial evaluations. Also, we utilized mediation quite frequently in Indiana, and you can see the number that were requested last year. And again, that's really par for course for us. So nothing really surprising to me in that. I do know that as a director, I participated in a couple Zoom mediations last school year, and they had varying degrees of success. In one, we were put into separate breakout rooms from the beginning by the mediator and not allowed at all to interact. While we did resolve all the issues with the mediator going back and forth between rooms, I felt like we were unable to reestablish the rapport that we usually do when we're able to sit around the table together. So I didn't personally like being in different Zoom rooms, but however, like I said, we were able to resolve it. And in another Zoom mediation that I experienced last year, probably just the situation was pretty tense. And I don't feel like the parent might have felt on equal footing with, I think it was in February. So by that point in time, I was pretty proficient with Zoom technology, and I don't know that the parent was. And so I just don't know how comfortable she felt participating, and it did not go well. And out of the many mediations I've done in my career, that was one of the few that ended unsuccessfully. But our requests as a state, you can see, are pretty consistent. So our due process hearing requests, you can see, also pretty consistent. Even, times of year that they happened, and some of you that might be in a coastal state like California or New York, you might be kind of shocked that these are our total number of requests. We do consider ourselves pretty collaborative here. We believe that we have really reasonable families that we work closely with, and although as a director, I would say we'd love not to have any requests, just because I feel like there's ways that we can collaborate and resolve issues before they get to a request. I will say that you see these number of requests here, and while I don't have a slide to indicate this, the actual number of hearings is usually under 5 per year. So the vast majority of our requests in Indiana are resolved before going to a hearing. And that's why I'd like to not see these number of requests, because if we are able to resolve them without the use of a hearing officer, then I think we should find ways to do that prior to a request being filed. So that's some of the data here in Indiana. We're going to move on to about our own organizations, and then we'll have some overlap and you'll see how our organizations collaborated. So first up, Lisa, I'm going to pass it to you.
Hi, thanks, Angie. So obviously, COVID was difficult for everyone. Difficult for families, difficult for students, difficult for schools. And we all had to be creative, whether it was learning different platforms to have meetings, or learning about mask mandates, or how kids were going to be educated at school when they had an IEP and they were supposed to get services. So InSource, of course, had to be creative during COVID because we were not going into schools to meet with families in schools. So here are some of the things that we did. We created a COVID information page on our website, and we particularly partnered with the Department of Ed because they had excellent resources, of course, on COVID, and we ensured that families learned about those. We intentionally made sure that we sent out the Department of Ed's information to families, especially when it had to do with the issues such as continuous learning plans and knowing that their schools were required to have them. So we were intentional about making sure that our families and our partners at schools, if needed, or in the community, had good information about COVID and about what was going on at the Department of Education. Additionally, we conducted 2 webinars with our state director of special education, and we also produced information dealing with those current needed topics that I mentioned before. This was a huge issue. Obviously, everyone's lives were turned upside down, from the school to the family to the community. So we wanted to make sure, as Indiana's Parent Training and Information Center, that we did our very best to get out vetted information and to help all parties. And when they had that information, they could in turn send it out to others. We also saw a significant increase in the families that we served during COVID. One thing that did occur had to do with when families were home with their children and families were actively the teacher, they were able to see concerns that arose. And since students were not in school and services were being creative, then sometimes those are some of the things that parents now saw and then needed to take back to the school for conversations about how their child would get service, or even how the basic program would run and how they'd hold their case conferences. So we made sure that we wanted to collaborate all across the state with different community stakeholders to ensure that we were putting out good vetted information that could be passed on to others at that other opportunities.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And next I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. And you may be wondering, why would a school attorney be on with the parent liaison and special ed director? Like, how does this play in? And I think that you're going to understand as you hear Mr. Manna speak that our school attorneys in Indiana are partners, and our parent attorneys too. We're partners together, and we're all about helping kids and families, and they're resources to us. And from my perspective, it helped us understand the law, provided us with ideas and suggestions. So I just wanted to give a little preface as to why next year hearing from one of our Indiana attorney partners.
Thank you, Angie, and thank you, Lisa, both of you, for the collaboration and the talking points from InSource, from iCase perspective. As Angie described and Lisa described as well, the insurmountable and just unprecedented past year and a half with efforts from the parent advocacy groups, from parent attorneys, from special ed directors, from our school folks, from our parents and our families, all across the board. Part of my effort in working with schools was to try to understand what we were dealing with. There was, trying to look at comparisons of natural disasters, hurricanes, trying to get some sense of, with a total shutdown, of the nation and our state and all systems, what exactly can we do? How do we go about fitting it into services that might be appropriate for students? It was an evolution, just like all of us dealing with understanding the new world of COVID and pandemic. It was an evolution. I have often talked about working with groups and in schools and administrators, that it was building the plane as we were flying it. We certainly were building the plane, and in fact, until the last couple of months, I think we probably had this idea that we just about had the plane built, but now we're back into mode in September and October of 2021, looking at that plane again, understanding we didn't have all the parts on the plane. And so, I looked at, from the national level, through the Office of Special Education and United States Department of Education guidance that was coming out immediately, saying things like, none of us wanted to have a shutdown. None of us wanted to have a national emergency. And what were the good faith efforts? There was an exact quote that came out from United States Department of Education memo guidance in March of 2020 that said, no one wants to have learning coming to a halt. And the U.S. Department of Education does not want to stand in the way of good faith efforts to educate students. This was, something that I had a recent interview with the NPR radio asked me about. Where did that term come from, good faith effort? I struggled in my memory banks, and then I went back and looked it up recently, that it came from that U.S. Department of Education memo saying we have to have good faith efforts. These were exceptional circumstances. And so that collaboration idea, understanding that, moving towards online services or moving towards something that was new and creative, and then documenting those efforts. So wanting everybody on both sides of the table, families, school folks, to understand, the more that we could secure documentation to show, here's our good faith effort. It may not look exactly what it looked like before, but we're certainly trying, and we want everybody to understand that we're trying. So the efforts that came together between all the different organizations here in Indiana were to, get that communication out, understand that maybe between different towns and communities across the state, that we did have different degrees of effort. We had different degrees of the impact on the local school programming. And remembering that even through now, fall 2021, Indiana has varying degrees of mask mandates. We have varying degrees of vaccination levels from community and counties to county. And so with all of that in mind, there are still varying degrees of difficulty in getting back up to speed. But then we also tried to look at new vocabulary. We looked at things, we were big proponents, I think, in Indiana, of looking at things called recovery services, understanding that all general ed students and special education students were losing out on some level of education. There was no doubt. But what could we do to not place blame on each other and instead look at how we can get kids to recover? So that term recovery services started to kind of make its way into the vocabulary. And again, I think as we go forward from today's date that we're recording this in late September, we're probably going to have to continue to create that effort in the remaining months and going forward.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andrew. I thought about that too, because I think the intention of Cadre when they picked this topic for this virtual conference in October was that this would be a look back at how we collaborated and what we learned, and that we'd have been moving forward by now. Yet here we still very much are with many of the challenges facing us. And as a school professional, I can say, gaps in lost instructional time as students move in and out of quarantines now. Indiana, we were back in person last fall. I know there's other states across the country that varied, and most of the districts across our state jumped right back in. And there were times that we had to close some schools or some classes for a period of time, but just until the metrics went down. So I'm going to speak about how iCase and CASE, our national organization, helped during COVID. And what you see before you is a graphic that CASE developed. CASE's executive director she came in right when COVID came in. She was new to her role, Phyllis Wolfram, and she was such an example for us across the country as special education directors, because we had many video webinars and conferences where she and our CASE president, Erin McGuire from Vermont, and our policy chair, Kevin Rubenstein from Illinois, would be on, and they would talk with us about what's happening across the country and other states. But these 4 priorities really were my benchmark as a special education director. It was very uncomfortable to think about working outside of the law. My school psychologist that I directly supervised really struggled with not being able to check every single box of data points with eligibility. As an example, needing to do a systematic observation of a student, even though we already had lots of other data. And we had to say last year, let's use the data we have to make the decisions that we have now and work outside the law a little bit. And I had to say, for the first time ever as a special ed director, we might not meet a timeline, and I know you're doing the best you can, and we'll see what comes of it. We knew that even though CASE advocated for flexibilities within IDEA, such as timelines, especially in spring 2020, when no one was in person, everything was shut down and we couldn't bring children in, and we had children turning age 3 who were transitioning from First Step services. There was really nothing we could have done to complete a quality evaluation during those times. So I worked outside the law, and as I struggled with the discomfort of that, and my leadership of a team with that, and their discomfort of that, because people are very good, conscious people, and we're so well trained within the bounds of the federal law and our state law. So to know that step number 1 here was focused on safety, health, and welfare. And I came back to that so often, and a lot of it too was first physical safety, and then it really became our own mental health and our perseverance and resilience, and that had to take priority. And then you can see on number 2, we looked at FAPE and delivering services as the best way you know how. That became the mantra, and through the CASE meetings, through frequent iCASE collaborations at state within our roundtables, we would say, what is the best way we know how? How are we meeting the needs of kiddos that have visual impairments, kiddos that have hearing impairments, kiddos with significant cognitive disabilities that we know aren't able to engage as well with technology? What can we do? What seems even remotely reasonable? And we were just really sharing and brainstorming as we did our best to provide services to kids. Step 3, then we were documenting, and there's back to Andrew's term, good faith effort right there. And that we were just keeping track of what we did. We knew that we would likely need to consider recovery services in the end. And like Andrew said, CASE also kind of wrestled with the term compensatory education and being a legal remedy, and it didn't really fit this because it's not like we were at fault because we couldn't. So we did a very good job of documenting what we could do, and even the attempts that we provided, and then the engagement of our students, because we knew that just because we provided a Zoom link and we provided resources, we had kiddos not engaging with us, and we knew we weren't going to say, well, the kid didn't engage, we tried. We get that may very well not have been the fault of the child. So we did lots of great documentation of what we were able to do. And then lastly, compliance, just kind of, once all those things were in place, we just kind of had to remind ourselves that IDEA wasn't built for this. And so this slide CASE just kept putting in front of us, and continues honestly to put in front of us. And I also need to give credit to Julie Weatherly. She's an attorney out of Alabama, I'm pretty sure. Andrew, Alabama, I think. I see you shaking your head. So I wanted to give credit to Julie Weatherly. She was on a lot of our CASE calls with us and helped guide us in some of these things too, and partnered with CASE. So while we're still in this section here, I want to talk how we worked together. So Andrew's firm is Church Hiddle and Antrim, and they're one of our Indiana attorney groups. We have other attorney groups who are equally amazing partners. We would read the updates from them because not only were we thinking about supporting the needs of kids, we also had our employees and we had employee personnel kind of issues to deal with. And so our school attorneys were very good about providing us with guidance around what do we do for that. And even when we came back in person, but we had employees with health issues that they couldn't return right away, how do we accommodate those in a reasonable way? So we definitely relied on the legal expertise within Indiana to make those decisions. So InSource at the time, their executive director was Joel Bonner, and I was the president-elect at the time. Pam Bell was our iCase president. The three of us would connect nearly weekly from the beginning in March when it happened all the way into June, and then about every other week after that. And some of the times we would just get on and be like, how are you? You doing okay? And we would really kind of gauge from Joel, because he had 2 children at home with disabilities who were learning remotely, and it wasn't ideal from them. And we'd ask him, how's this working for your kids? You know, can you tell us what's working well and what's not working well? And so him sharing his insights was very helpful to us. And we'd say, Joel, how can we connect with families? What can we do better? And just like Andrew said, we had different things happening in different parts of the state. So we'd say, tell us where you're hearing great things happening in the state. And so we can share those with areas of the state that might not have had the best opportunities up and running from the beginning. I don't think I have a slide built in for this later, so I'm just going to say it here that, Indiana has some very rural areas. And so access to reliable internet was definitely an issue. And just like in other parts of the country, I'm certain you all did some creative things to help get access to kids. For example, in some rural areas, they would take a school bus out into an area in the community that had a Wi-Fi signal on it and allow kiddos to connect that way. And one of the benefits of COVID was our rapid dive into the use of technology like this to engage with people. And we quickly held CASE conferences, worked with families to share, this is what we've got, this is what we can do, how's this working on your end. A lot of our teachers became sort of a coach to the parents who were working at home to implement the IEP and work on the skills with the kids. And I will say that we had, in some instances, even better parent participation in CASE conferences when we offered this kind of format for the conference than we did when we required people to take off work and to come in person. And so that has certainly been a benefit for us because we want parents engaged in that interactive process. I can't tell you how many CASE conferences I was a part of where the parent was, on the thing from their phone in their car on their lunch break and trying to look at their phone and make it bigger to see the draft IEP that was sent with them. And was just so appreciative of their efforts to join us in those CASE conferences. So I think universally across Indiana, we would say that the quick dive into the use of video platforms and technology for CASE conferences has been definitely helpful. I'm going to ask, while we're on this slide here, Lisa and Andrew to weigh in about some of the other things that we might have learned that could be a takeaway for what happened and it kind of changed practice and we might not completely change back from this.
I'll go ahead. I'll jump in, Lisa, if that's okay. As I described earlier, looking at what was coming from the federal level, understanding that the IDEA and special education services did not stop, did not halt just because we were in a pandemic. But again, having that collaboration and that cooperation from organizations like InSource and Lisa, and understanding that we had to kind of look at, okay, the timelines don't stop on some things. Maybe that if a school is totally closed down, then we can halt things. But if we're still limping along and we're still trying to provide some services, that we have to figure out a way to also implement. And so there were these, discussions, there were the communication, there were updates, newsletters, schools like Angie's and her collaboration, putting together charts and spreadsheets of how you go about doing evaluations, how you go about doing child find, all of those pieces. And then, answering unique and new questions, and seeing things like, how do you provide at-home services? Does that change the least restrictive environment? Do you change the IEP? All of those questions were new, things that we didn't have ready answers for. So it was through a constant daily moving target that we were able to have those good faith discussions. And again, still having those as of today.
I have to agree, Angie and Andrew, this was so unprecedented, and no one would have ever thought about a pandemic shutting the whole, world down. So part of what we did see is parents telling us that in general, many of the electronic platforms worked well for them. It's not perfect. We know we'd rather in general sit in a room typically, but it did mean they didn't have to take off time. And sometimes that is just not an easy thing for a parent to do. Additionally, as we all worked together, and I was glad that Angie really spoke to our partnership, it doesn't mean things are perfect in Indiana. Doesn't mean that we always see eye to eye as all the parties get together, but it does mean that we have been much more open to collaboration these last numerous years of being intentional to discuss the issues that are going on, the things that we're seeing, all of us from the field, whether that be the school attorney side, the special education director, or family and community, and that we've had those hard discussions. And having those hard discussions is really the very first step to changing things in your state. Because when you don't have those hard discussions and you don't deal with those subjects, then typically you're going to see more and more complaints and more due process and mediations, because no one's having those hard discussions. And that's part of what we do at InSource. We're not there to tell a family what to do. We are there to help with those hard discussions. And I really appreciate, and InSource really appreciates the fact that in Indiana, we have worked together on that collaboration. And the fact that many times now, the electronic platform has been opened up. There are some kids who actually did better without some of the social pieces. There are families who really want to continue on having electronic case conferences. And of course, it's a preference. And of course, not all schools went ahead and kept a virtual component, but at least now there are discussions about that. And I do think it really has opened the door to be able to hop on a meeting like this. Thank you so much for joining our session, because we can now all be sitting in Indiana and this can be shared throughout the country. So part of what did happen was trying to look at IDEA and look at Article 7, which didn't stop, but we also had to share, okay, what's your very main concern or desire out of this IEP during the pandemic? And so it did bring about some really good discussions of, okay, perhaps we will kind of put this on the back burner because we really need to focus on this during this time. And we know with recovery services or whatever is going to happen when we come back in person, we can work on that. But additionally, we did see schools be very creative with Zoom and breakout rooms and locking things down and thinking about how can we still give services to kids. And then we had these discussions about what happens if they don't. And those were the hard discussions, but that's part of collaboration with all of the different parties.
Absolutely. And we are going to, in our third or final third of the presentation here, talk about some work that our organizations had been doing even before COVID. And I think because we have those great relationship foundations already built, it was an easy transition for us during the pandemic. Before I do make that switch, I did want to share another thing that ICASE did, and we did it in partnership with our school attorneys and the Department of Education and InSource. We provided a lot of virtual professional development. In fact, right away in June of 2020, we had a virtual professional development just to share how people are responding and what they're doing and how they're planning for the new school year through iCase. And then in November, we had Zooming in on Indiana law. And we had an attorney partner with a district director pair, and they would present content from both perspectives. So we'd have the legal perspective and the practical perspective as well. And then in December, iCase hosted a virtual assessment training. We reached out and found a couple of school psychologists in the private sector and one in the public sector from Indianapolis Public Schools who were already engaging in some virtual assessments. And we provided training to our school psychologists across Indiana on how they could think about that. That was a big, big mind shift for many of our psychologists, and most of them did not jump right into it just for various concerns, but it is a new tool that we have and something that we will look forward to seeing if that's an option for us in the future to meet the needs of those kids. So moving us on into our next section, positive changes in practice. We've been discussing those here just in advance of the slide, but just wanted to share with you more about what we've been doing in Indiana even prior to the pandemic. So first of all, as from my perspective as a special education director, is the QR code to these articles on our website is I work with our school teams to understand the perspective of parents. And these titles here are a series of newsletter articles that I've written. And the difficult parent is a teaser line for you to get in and realize that parents aren't difficult. They come with a variety of emotions. And I talk about the grief cycle and ways that we can connect with parents and how they feel when they come to conferences. So I think from a special ed director, helping our folks understand, it helps engage that connection and maybe help our teachers feel potentially less defensive when a parent maybe seems kind of strongly advocating, because there's a reason that they're strongly advocating. It's their kiddo, and we would all do that. Something else that I've done is I've created a cover sheet to use with our procedural safeguards or parents' rights. And this is just an example screenshot of one here. And it's got a paragraph at the top and it opens with, your child is important to us. And then you can insert the name of the school district, and we're committed to partnering with you. And it explains about a tool that we have in Indiana, which is a very, very good tool called Navigating the Course. And there's a link to it on our website. It's a parent-friendly version of our state law. In fact, I actually will even refer a lot of educators to it because it's easier to read. And then the intention here is that this has the child, go back here, the child's teacher of record with their picture and email, the building principal's picture and email, our district director, and then of course in my instance, I'm a co-op director, so they can see all of the people that they can communicate with. A lot of times my research and dissertation is on dispute resolution, and in my research I found that parents didn't know there was a co-op director to reach out to help them. So this was one way, based on my research, that I knew of trying to help all parents from the beginning know that there were lots of people. So if they felt like the teacher of record kind of said no to a request, or the building principal was causing them some frustration, that there's other people that they can reach out to. So we have that. I will say additionally, and I don't have a screenshot of it on here, our procedural safeguards, we provide paper copies always, and I wrote a handwritten letter on top of it that goes to all parents, just again explaining and offering the support there too. This is in the middle here, Dr. Nancy Holsopple. She's our state director of special education, and we have a really amazing state department. They're very supportive of the InSource, our parent network agency, as well as district directors and schools. We're at the State House here together. This is another member, Petty Chem of iCase, with me, and we work frequently together, and I just want to give a shout out to them. Indiana does provide free facilitated IEP facilitators to us to use. Also, through our engagement together, the state—
Hey, Angie, sorry, just real quick. I think a couple of your slides did not advance, so you're still stuck on working together. If you want to try to click there.
Okay, do you not see them moving, Lisa?
No, I don't. I was just going to share that. I'm sorry. It's the age of technology. That
Okay.
is what happens.
Yeah,
no worries,
well, okay,
but-
good to know. Hopefully it's picking up on the recording since it's recording my desktop and maybe just not coming through on your end. We'll go with that. We'll work on describing our slides here. So I will quit pointing out specific people and pictures then with my mouse, since maybe you can't see them during the recording. But I will say that our state was referring to their division as the due process team. And through collaboration, we're like, why is it called the due process team? There's so many more ways of resolving concerns than just going to due process. So throughout the conversation, our state has renamed their team the dispute resolution team, which brought some happiness to my heart. And also we've had 2 different special ed law conferences in Indiana and had some partnerships with that. So I've advanced my slide on, though maybe Andrew and Lisa, you can't see it, to our slide about, Andrew, it's your turn to talk about the School Boards Association and how we collaborated and why.
So thank you, Angie. Yeah, it is for those, hopefully you have Angie's slide that's titled Hidden Challenges in Resolving Special Education Disputes. I think Lisa and I are seeing a different slide, but we'll ad lib here. The collaboration piece, going back to the presentations, trying to do joint presentations together, trying to match up with groups of a different type, inviting InSource, for example, to come to the iCase conferences in Indiana, and that cross learning. I mean, there are opportunities like that. My personal opinion is, Angie mentioned just a moment ago, due process is really the last resort when there is an actual disagreement. But, we tried to collaborate on these hidden challenges in resolving, presenting to the School Board Association. So superintendents, school administrators, others would know that there are some reoccurring issues, that there are disagreements, that there are things we need to resolve, and we need to have the context and be aware of those situations. So understanding that background, they could then go forward and try to work with parents in their local communities, taking forward the information we brought them in the fall of 2019. So it was a co-presentation, special ed director, superintendent, school attorney, and we were able to kind of bring information forward for schools to be more aware how to work with their families. Angie, I'm going to ask it to go back to you, but I think you're without slides now.
Yeah, so you do see that I'm without slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I sadly do not see our Zoom meeting recording right now. Ugh.
No, it says it's recording in mine up in the right and the left-hand corner. It does say it's recording.
Okay, well, perfect. See, this is what life has been like. We're going to make the assumption that it's still recording and finish up because we're nearly done. So I'm just going to, while I try to figure out the slides, ask you guys to keep rolling and hope that we don't have to re-record. It appears as if Zoom has given up on us in the middle of our presentation. Are you guys still there?
We're here, and
Yes.
you are still recording.
Okay, great. So go ahead, Lisa. I think you have the last slide.
Well, one of the things that did occur was a work group that was put together, a dispute resolution work group. And of course, it occurred right before COVID, and many of the things did not continue. But there were some of the things that did in training and mediation, personnel and due process officers. So some things did continue. But I think what we would like everyone to consider is that collaboration. The fact that the Parent Training Center is actually, someone is embedded at the Department of Education. The fact that I got to present at iCase and several other staff are presenting at iCase the end of this month, and what is being presented on by Dr. Don McGrath at the end of the month for our state iCase all has to do with best practices. What can be done by special ed directors to make families feel comfortable, and how can things work well? It's all about collaboration, and that is also what the purpose was of the dispute resolution collaboration work group was to try to see how do we reduce due process by collaborating, by communicating. It doesn't mean it's always going to happen. There are difficult situations, and there are times where there's going to be a due process hearing, and that is what's going to happen, and it might need to happen. But this work group did meet together regularly, and they had a lot of wonderful collaborative opportunities and ideas. And so we were very thankful to be part of that collaboration and to have all the different working partners there.
Okay, did you guys see the slides that are up now on your end?
No.
No, okay. Well,
No.
I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up just because I'm not sure it's still recording. And I'm gonna like be super hopeful to the technology gods that it did work. And if it didn't, send out an email to find a time to do this again.
I think that would probably be a good thing because it's hard to know what did, but
yeah, I'll check the recording for sure. But thank you guys for your time. If this worked and we use this recording, thank you all for those of you that are listening. And you can reach out to any of us for further contact. So hello, Angie Bosley here live actually without recording difficulties, and Lisa Paddock is here as well. Lisa, I believe you're able to unmute yourself. So we greatly apologize for that tech that happened there at the end. And it's just one of those things during COVID that, you know, we were most of the way done with recording and my computer actually like totally gave out, but I think we recovered okay. So we would just invite you, anyone that's with us live at the moment, to unmute yourself, turn on your camera if you want, so we can engage in a conversation. We'd love to hear from your state, if any of the messages that we shared resonated with you in your state. If you'd like any clarifications on things that we talked about in Indiana, we would be happy to do that as well. And it's very possible, Lisa, knowing that we're recorded and with several other wonderful sessions happening at this moment, that these folks may have stepped away from their computers right now. And we know how that works during this time as well.
well, for whoever is listening or will be listening, we do want to thank you for attending. And yes, the end of our presentation was very much like we might see some meetings with some difficulty, or we might see some technology snafus, along with trying to schedule through illness and meetings and crisis. It is what happens at this time. So I think one thing that we all have learned is about giving grace and patience, and that we all are working together. But it's been a good collaboration to have some of those difficult conversations, and know that we're working toward the goal of helping kids. That's what everyone wants to keep in mind, that we want to have good outcomes for kids. So I appreciate everyone who listens to this, and the work with Angie and Andrew and the state, just trying to come to good outcomes for families and kids.
Absolutely. And seeing no questions in the chat and a few people dropping off, I'm going to read the crowd, read the audience, and then just do a final wrap up. And like Lisa said, thank you all for listening, but especially thank you to Cadre. I am a super fan of Cadre, and they're such a support and a resource for all of us across the country as we work to help families navigate the world of education for their children with disabilities in schools as we work with families. So I thank them for their resources, their partnerships, their collaboration, and of course for putting on this virtual conference as well as the one which I believe will be in person next October. So Noella,
Absolutely.
I think we're good to finish up our recording here if you're good with that too.
Thank you, Cadre, and thank you, everyone.